The phone rang at 3 in the morning, cutting through the silence like a blade through fabric. Mom's breathing had gotten worse. The nurses said we should come now while there was still time. I threw on yesterday's clothes and drove through empty streets, my heart hammering against my ribs. The fluorescent lights in the ICU made everything look pale and unreal, like we were all underwater. Mum looked so small in that hospital bed, her thin grey hair spread across the pillow like spun glass. Emma was already there, her green eyes red from crying, her usual perfect composure completely shattered. We sat on opposite sides of Mum's bed, listening to the steady beep of machines. For a few hours, it felt like we were just sisters again, united in our fear and love. None squeezed our hands weakly, and I thought maybe this terrible time might bring our family closer together. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of hospital visits and family meetings. Dad barely spoke, just sat in the corner chair reading the same magazine over and over. Uncle David kept bringing coffee for everyone, his nervous laugh echoing down the sterile hallways whenever someone thanked him. Someone needed to help Mum with her phone calls and banking since her hands shook too much. I volunteered, figuring it would give me something useful to do during the long hospital stays. Mum whispered her passwords to me, trusting me with the small daily tasks that kept her world running. Emma started looking at me differently during our hospital visits, her green eyes narrowing whenever I used Mum's phone. She'd make little comments about how I always seemed to know Mum's business these days. I brushed it off, thinking grief was making everyone paranoid and suspicious of normal things. Emma cornered me in the hospital parking lot on a Tuesday that started like any other. Her face was streaked with tears, but her voice was steady and cold as winter steel. "I know what you've been doing, Sarah. I know about the money." She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, scrolling through screenshots like a prosecutor presenting a case. Bank notifications, transfer confirmations, amounts that made my stomach drop to the pavement. $15,000, Sarah, gone. While Mum is dying, you're stealing from her. My mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, no words coming out. The numbers on her screen swam in front of my eyes, real and impossible at the same time. "I didn't. Emma, I would never. You have to believe me." Emma's face had already hardened into something I'd never seen before, like stone carved from pure betrayal. "You had access to her phone. You knew her passwords. You're the only one who could have done this." Her voice broke on the last word, and somehow that made it worse than if she'd screamed. Within hours, everyone knew. Phone calls buzzed between relatives like angry wasps spreading the news. Aunt Margaret called Dad, her voice loud enough that I could hear her outrage through the phone. Uncle Tom just shook his head when he saw me, like he'd expected this all along. Family group chats that used to include me suddenly went quiet, conversations clearly continuing elsewhere without me. Dad couldn't even look at me directly anymore, his eyes sliding away whenever I tried to talk. The hospital waiting room became a minefield where relatives would leave when I arrived. My sister had always been dramatic, but this was different. Her grief seemed so genuine, so raw. She'd break down crying whenever someone mentioned the missing money, clutching tissues like lifelines. Even I started to wonder if maybe I'd done something wrong without realizing it, some mistake that looked like theft. Late that night, I'd lie awake replaying every interaction with Mum's phone, every banking task I'd helped with. Had I accidentally transferred money somewhere? Had I misunderstood something crucial? The doubt crept into my bones like cold water, making me question my own memory and sanity. But in my clearest moments, when the doubt lifted, I felt something else entirely. This felt orchestrated, too neat, too perfectly designed to destroy me. And if I didn't do it, then someone else did, someone who wanted me to take the blame. Sunday dinner at Dad's house turned into a silent war zone, with Emma on one side and me on the other. Relatives picked sides without ever saying it out loud. their body language speaking volumes. Uncle David kept trying to lighten the mood with jokes that fell flat, his nervous laugh filling the uncomfortable silences. Carrying the family's suspicion felt like wearing a lead blanket but got heavier each day. Every kindness Mom had ever shown me now looked calculating in hindsight, according to their whispered theories. I started avoiding mirrors because I couldn't stand seeing the face everyone now associated with betrayal. My sister seemed to grow stronger as I grew weaker, her accusations becoming more elaborate and detailed. She'd tell anyone who'd listen about how she'd always had a feeling something was wrong with my behavior. Her performance was so convincing that I almost believed it myself, despite knowing it was impossible. But late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I'd go over Emma's story again and again. Some details didn't quite line up. Times when she said she'd seen me doing things that I remembered differently. It was like looking at a beautiful painting and noticing the brushstrokes didn't quite match the signature. I called the bank myself, desperate for any information that might clear my name. They wouldn't tell me much over the phone, but they agreed to send official documentation about the transfers. Miss Rodriguez, the representative, sounded sympathetic but professional as she explained their investigation process. The days stretched like taffy while we waited for the bank's official report about where the money had gone. Emma and I barely spoke anymore, communicating through Dad when necessary, like hostile diplomats. The silence between us felt more painful than any fight we'd ever had as children. While we were tearing each other apart, Mom slipped further away from us, her breathing becoming more labored. The doctors started using words like comfort care and making her peaceful that made my chest tight. I realized we might lose her while our family was broken into pieces, and it felt like losing everything twice. Miss Rodriguez called on a Thursday morning with news that changed everything, but solved nothing. The money hadn't gone to my account. She was clear about that, her professional voice carrying just a hint of relief. But it hadn't gone to Emma's account either, which left us all staring at a mystery with no easy answers. The transfers had been sent to an international account, somewhere overseas with layers of privacy protection. No name attached, no clear destination country, just a series of numbers that led nowhere we could follow. The bank was investigating, but these things took time, maybe months we didn't have. So the first time since this nightmare started, I saw doubt flicker across my sister's face. She'd been so certain it was me, but now her carefully constructed case was crumbling. Yet she still couldn't bring herself to apologize, couldn't admit she might have been wrong about everything. Instead of bringing us together, the new information just created more suspicion and paranoia among everyone. If it wasn't me, and it wasn't Emma, then who had access to Mom's accounts? Suddenly, everyone was looking at each other with new eyes, wondering who among us was capable of such betrayal. Mum's sister became convinced that Emma and I were working together, that this was all an elaborate cover-up. Her accusations grew wild and desperate, turning family gatherings into interrogation sessions. Uncle Tom just nodded along with whatever his wife said, but his eyes looked tired and confused. The stress was killing Dad slowly, turning him into a ghost who haunted his own house. He'd sit in his chair for hours, staring at nothing, like he was trying to disappear entirely. When I tried to talk to him, he'd just shake his head and walk away, unable to deal with any more conflict. Through all of this chaos, Uncle David remained the one steady presence, bringing food and offering comfort to everyone. He'd pat my shoulder sympathetically and tell Emma he understood her pain, playing the role of peacekeeper perfectly. His wine-rimmed glasses would catch the light as he nodded thoughtfully, always ready with a tissue or a cup of coffee. Something about Uncle David's constant helpfulness started to feel performative, like he was trying too hard to appear caring. He always seemed to know exactly what to say, exactly how to comfort whoever needed it most. And he asked a lot of questions about the bank investigation, more than seemed necessary for someone just trying to help. The family tensions reached a breaking point as Mum's condition became critical and the money mystery remained unsolved. Everyone was exhausted from suspicion and grief, raw nerves exposed like live wires sparking in the dark. We all knew something had to give, but none of us could have predicted how the truth would finally emerge. The revelation came on an ordinary Sunday afternoon at Dad's house, over leftover casserole and weak coffee. We were all there despite the tension, drawn together by the gravity of Mom's failing health. The conversation was mundane, carefully avoiding any mention of missing money or broken trust. Aunt Margaret was complaining about her mortgage payment, and Uncle Tom was nodding along automatically. Dad mentioned something about the hospital bills piling up, his voice flat and emotionless. It was the kind of boring family conversation that usually put everyone to sleep, nothing significant or memorable. That's when Uncle David made his mistake, the small comment that would unravel everything he'd carefully constructed. He laughed his nervous laugh and waved his hand dismissively at Dad's concern about money. Well, that amount was already sent to the Swiss account anyway. The silence that followed was different from all the other uncomfortable silences we'd endured these past weeks. This was the silence of a record needle scratching across vinyl, of time itself hiccuping to a stop. Everyone's forks paused halfway to their mouths, suspended in the sudden weight of realization. No one had ever mentioned Switzerland. The bank had been deliberately vague about the destination country. The family had only ever known that money was missing, not where it had gone or how it had been moved. Yet Uncle David had just casually referenced details that shouldn't have existed in his mind. Emma and I turned to stare at each other across the table, our long feud suddenly irrelevant. In her green eyes, I saw the same dawning horror that was probably reflected in mine. For the first time in months, we were on the same side again, united in our terrible understanding. Uncle David's face went through a series of expressions like a time-lapse of dawning panic. First, confusion, then recognition of his mistake, then desperate calculation as he tried to figure out how to fix it. His nervous laugh came out strangled and weak, his hands trembling as he reached for his coffee cup. He tried to backtrack, his words tumbling over each other in a rush to explain away the unexplainable. Someone must have told me. I thought I heard. Maybe the bank representative mentioned. But his voice was shaking now, and everyone could hear the lie crumbling in real time. Aunt Margaret's mouth hung open, like she was trying to catch flies, her usual sharp tongue completely silenced. Dad looked more alert than he had in weeks, his grief temporarily replaced by shock and growing anger. Uncle Tom just kept blinking behind his own glasses, as if he could reset reality with enough rapid eye movements. Uncle David's composure finally shattered completely, and the truth came pouring out like water from a broken dam. He'd had gambling debts, serious ones, with serious people who didn't accept late payments gracefully. He'd helped Mom with her computer sometimes, and she'd trusted him with her banking information during one of his visits. The worst part wasn't the theft itself, but the calculated way he'd orchestrated Anna's and my destruction. He'd known about our childhood rivalries, our old resentments that could be easily inflamed with the right pressure. He'd planted seeds of suspicion, asking Emma if she'd noticed anything strange about my behavior with Mom's phone. By making us blame each other, he'd ensured that no one would look at the helpful, neutral uncle in the corner. He'd played us against each other like instruments in some sick orchestra, conducting our mutual destruction. While we'd been tearing our family apart, he'd been there with tissues and coffee, watching his plan work perfectly. The room erupted in shouting and crying as the full scope of Uncle David's betrayal became clear. Aunt Margaret screamed at her brother-in-law. Uncle Tom looked like he might be sick, and Dad just sat in stunned silence. But Emma and I weren't looking at anyone else anymore. We were looking at each other. In my sister's tear-filled eyes, I saw my own grief reflected back. doubled and magnified. We'd lost our mother's money, but worse, we'd almost lost each other over a lie we'd been manipulated into believing. The months of hatred and suspicion crumbled away, leaving only the raw truth of what we both endured. Emma whispered first, her voice barely audible over the family chaos erupting around us. "It was never you, Sarah. I'm so sorry. I believed him, and I almost destroyed us." I reached across the table and took her trembling hand, feeling like I was touching solid ground after months of drowning. We cried together for the first time since we were children, mourning not just the money, but the time we'd lost. All those weeks we could have been supporting each other through Mum's illness, we'd spent as enemies instead. Uncle David had stolen more than money from us. He'd stolen our last healthy moments as a family. The police became involved, and Uncle David was arrested for elder financial abuse and fraud. The Swiss account was frozen, though recovering the money would take time and lawyers we couldn't afford. But that didn't matter as much as I'd thought it would. Having my sister back mattered more than any amount of money. We went to the hospital together that night, Emma and I walking side by side for the first time in months. Mum was barely conscious, but she seemed to sense that something had changed between us. Her faded blue eyes moved from my face to Emma's, and I swear I saw relief flicker there before she closed them again. Mom passed away 3 days later, with both her daughters holding her hands and her husband by her side. The funeral was smaller than it might have been, with Uncle David's arrest creating waves of shock through our extended family. But Emma and I stood together, supporting each other through the goodbye we should have been preparing for all along. Rebuilding our relationship wasn't automatic or easy, despite the dramatic revelation of Uncle David's guilt. We had to learn how to talk to each other again, how to share grief without suspicion coloring every interaction. But we were both committed to healing what had been broken, to honoring Mom's memory by being the sisters she'd raised us to be. Sometimes we'd sit together in comfortable silence, processing everything that had happened to our family. Emma would fidget with her wedding ring the way she had as a child, and I'd tuck my hair behind my ears nervously. These small, familiar gestures felt like coming home after being lost in a foreign country for months. We talked about how Uncle David had known exactly which buttons to push, which old wounds to reopen between us. Emma admitted she'd always felt competitive with me, and I confessed that I'd sometimes felt like the less favored daughter. These vulnerabilities had made us perfect targets for someone who wanted to divide and conquer our family's trust. Our family gatherings were quieter now, marked by Uncle David's absence and the lingering trauma of his betrayal. Dad was slowly emerging from his shell of grief, and Aunt Margaret was seeing a therapist to process her brother-in-law's deception. But Emma and I had each other again, and that felt like a miracle worth celebrating every single day. In the end, Uncle David's terrible plan had backfired in a way he never could have anticipated. Yes, he'd temporarily destroyed our family's trust and stolen money we desperately needed during a crisis. But he'd also forced Emma and me to confront our relationship honestly, stripping away years of petty resentments and childhood grudges. We were closer now than we'd been since we were little girls, sharing secrets and dreams under blanket forts. The shared trauma of being manipulated and betrayed had created a bond that felt unbreakable this time. We'd learned that we were stronger together than apart, and that lesson was worth more than any amount of money Uncle David could have stolen.